go ahead and get started.
Okay.
If anyone is having trouble hearing, having technical issues, just drop a message in the Q&A. The Q&A is available. If you have questions, we'll try to take a break every once in a while and look at those and answer the questions. My name is Mark Weicker. I'm with Albite Weicker, and this is the third special education legal clinic and the third workshop in the series. Can you hear me, Danielle?
It lagged, but now I can hear you.
You want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I told Mark beforehand, I said my internet is like 90% good. So 10% might be a little laggy. I'm sorry for that. Yes, I'm Danielle Randolph, and I am a special education advocate that works with Albite Weicker.
All right, thanks. And like I mentioned, this is the third special education legal clinic. This is put on by our firm, Albite Weicker, Disability Rights Ohio, and the Ohio Coalition for the Education of Children with Disabilities. And thank you for participating, both volunteers and attendees. This will be a good session, I think, and kind of right in Danielle's wheelhouse. The third in the series, again, this one is behavior and social and emotional supports. And without any further ado, Danielle, go right ahead.
Okay, so we are going to start off with some definitions. If you've attended our previous Power to the Parents seminars, you know that special education is full of acronyms. I think we called it, what did we call it? I don't know, the soup of letters, whatever we call it now. But there are a lot of definitions that we use in special education, and today we're going to focus on the specific definitions used when we talk about behavior and social emotional functioning. So the first one is an FBA, or a functional behavior assessment. And a functional behavior assessment is conducted whenever a student is having problematic behaviors in the school setting. And it may be a manifestation of their disability, it may be creating harm to themselves or others. The behavior itself is causing some sort of disruption. And so that's when the school district will do a functional behavior assessment to see what the function of the behavior is, so we can help do the next step, which is do a behavior intervention plan, or a BIP. That's kind of what follows up after that FBA is completed. The team will talk about what interventions can be put into place to help that student be successful. You cannot have a successful behavior plan if you don't have the FBA first, because you're still going to be left with the question of why the behavior is occurring, where is it occurring, and what can we do to sort of come in at the beginning to stop that behavior from happening. So the FBA and BIP go hand in hand. Now, sometimes you'll have a board certified behavior analyst who is a part of that FBA, and that's the BCBA. I feel like in the field of education, a few years ago, BCBAs were kind of all the rage, all the talk. A lot of parents were requesting BCBAs. I noticed a lot of school sites that I'm friends with were going to get BCBA trained. School districts were either hiring BCBAs or they were affiliated with an organization that had BCBAs. I feel like, though, maybe Mark, I feel like in the last couple of years, I have not heard of that as frequently as I did a few years ago. So I don't know if that craze, if you will, is kind of dying off a little bit. But you don't have to have a BCBA be a part of the FBA or a part of your child's team really at all. It's helpful, but it's not necessary. You can have a school psychologist do the FBA. You can have intervention specialists be a part of that. Some school districts do have behavior specialists, may not be BCBA certified, but behavior specialists that work with the district. And those people are very, very valuable to that FBA and BIP fluidity. Next, we're going to talk about ABA, which is applied behavior analysis. ABA, I guess kind of like the BCBA, ABA used to be really big, especially for students with autism. But I'm finding, again, these last couple of years, a lot of people are not recommending ABA anymore. And that could be personal preference. But in looking at the autism community and those individuals who are autistic and are a part of that community, a lot of them have been speaking out lately about ABA and how they don't see it as a positive intervention approach for them when they went through it. So I think when you look at ABA, without doing applied behavior analysis, you can obviously go in and approach behavior with that same with that same approach, right? Come in, look at the behavior, and be really direct and very systematic and addressing the behavior and trying to come up with behavior plans or reinforcements to either diminish the behavior or increase the behavior, depending on what you're working on. So I think there are definitely ways that's not strict ABA, because ABA is pretty strict. You have people who are trained in ABA. You have outside organizations that are strictly used just to come into the home or the school to do ABA. But you can do the same approach without being so strict. So that was kind of my soapbox a little bit on the ABA. PBIS, positive behavior interventions and supports. This, I guess, on the opposite of BCBA and ABA, this actually has increased in occurrences in school districts. And the Ohio Department of Education has really put the highlight on that in the past 5 years and is requiring schools to have some sort of PBIS. When we talked about RTI, maybe two slides or two Power of the Parents ago, RTI, response intervention, that includes your positive behavior interventions and supports. So we look at tier 1 PBIS, that's looking at either the entire school, usually it's an entire school approach for PBIS, and then you kind of go into the smaller tier 2, tier 3. So looking at classroom approaches, looking at small group, looking at one-on-one. It's kind of used very similar to RTI when you look at academic supports. PBIS is really the same when you look at behavior and social emotional well-being. I've seen a lot of school counselors who are involved on the PBIS team because they have a lot of good training in positive behavior and social emotional well-being. But if you have a student who's struggling with behavior, then that's where you talk to your team about PBIS and looking at more one-on-one supports. And that could be working with the school's mental health therapist, the school counselor for one-on-one, some one-on-one counseling sessions. A lot of school counselors do small groups that may be specific to your child's needs. For instance, if your child is struggling because maybe there's a divorce happening in the family, maybe they are going through puberty, right? There could be definitely some areas that there are a lot of kids that are working on those skills, and the school counselor may pull small groups to work on that. So PBIS, again, tier 1 whole group or the school-wide supports, and then you can kind of dial down into what the specific needs are. ABC, antecedent behavior consequence, this really kind of goes into the FBA. So when I'm going through the FBA in a few slides, you'll see this approach. So the antecedent is what's happening before the behavior. What comes first, whether that's the setting that the child's in, maybe a particular person, what's going on before that behavior is occurring. And then the consequence is what happens after. Now, consequence, I think, has a negative connotation. We think about something bad. That's not always the case. A consequence just means what is happening because of the behavior. A consequence could be a natural consequence, like the student's not receiving their education because they're outside of the class. The student is not being with their peers because they have to be removed from that situation. So a consequence, again, is whatever happens after that behavior. But we always want to keep that in mind when we're looking at behavior and we're looking at intervention approaches, that ABC, what happened before the behavior, what was the behavior, and then what happened after the behavior occurred. And then lastly is the manifestation determination review. And that is really tied into a 504 and IEP. And we look at, is the behavior that's occurring, is it due to the child's disability, the manifestation of the disability? So what's happening, and is that behavior a part of the child's disability? So behavior has many forms. And I always tell parents, I always tell schools, behavior is a way for the child to communicate. You see that a lot of younger kids who don't have the language or the speech skills to be able to verbalize how they're feeling. If they're feeling anxious, they can't say that. They don't know, maybe know what that feeling even is. So you see behaviors instead. And so if you're a parent, you can kind of maybe see patterns occurring. So if you're getting repeated calls from the school or you're seeing some incident reports coming home, if the school is calling you to ask to pick up your child, and I will say since the attendance bill, since schools are really kind of cracking down on that attendance, I'm seeing less and less of parents requesting to have their child picked up. I think it's still occurring, but I will also add in there, if your child is on an IEP and your school calls you to pick up your child, that can go into the days when we talk about days, 10 days for your child to be out before you do some sort of action plan, that counts towards that day. So if they call you and say, hey, can you pick up your child because they're having a behavior outburst, that counts towards those days. I think schools don't always tell you that. Repeated suspensions, if your child obviously is being suspended, that is a huge trigger for you to request an FBA to see what is going on. If your child isn't allowed to be a part of the field trip or special events, I've seen some where the school will ask the parent to attend the field trip with the child. Now, your child can't go on this field trip unless you attend with them. That's a problem, in my opinion. That's where the team needs to talk about, does that child maybe need an extra adult, an aide or something? Also, when you look at your IEP, I think it is section 10. I think it's section 10. We talk about, is your child able to participate in all non-academic and extracurricular activities with their same age peers? This is a good time to talk about that. If your child has needs in the classroom that you think would apply to a field trip or an extracurricular activity, or even just an assembly, there we go, I couldn't think of the word, an assembly, do they need extra supports in those times and periods? If they do, then have that conversation during the IEP meeting. Psychology reports are easier. So yeah, I mean, if you have an outside report from your child's psychologist, if your child is working with a counselor and they're seeing some behaviors, or your child is talking about behaviors that are occurring in the school, then bring that up to the team and have a meeting. If there is behavior, if there's noted behaviors in that ETR, make sure they're addressed in the IEP. And sometimes your child may just need a behavior goal on that IEP. Sometimes they may need a separate behavior plan, depending on what the behaviors are and the intensity of those behaviors. If you're seeing behaviors at home, bring that up to the school. I will say, I've had a number of kids that I've worked with in the past that their teachers will say, oh, they're great at school. They do so well. They sit in their seat. They're so quiet and compliant. And they come home and, the lid blows off, right? Because they're holding it together as long as they can. And then they get home where they're comfortable and they're safe and they let it all go. But what you can see is there's things happening at school and they're just not able to or willing to share those. Maybe they're having a lot of anxiety. Things are happening at school and they can't verbalize that, or they don't feel comfortable verbalizing that. And so you're seeing that at home. Again, it's not just a home problem, it's probably a school problem as well. So bring that up to the team. And then when you talk with your child, if they're sharing anything with you that's occurring in the school, again, like I've said probably 5 times already, bring it up to the team. Your child has a team. They have a team of teachers. They have, the school psychologist, the school counselor, if they have a mental health therapist in the school setting, the principal, all those people are a part of a child's team. So have that open communication and talk about what's going on and what we can do to help that child. So some of the behaviors noted here, or maybe what you are seeing. As your child gets older, the tardies and skipping class. And I think schools are becoming they're cracking down a little bit more on that. But I know, when I was growing up, they weren't really great about doing that. So if you're getting phone calls, your child's missing school or missing periods, that's a big red flag. What's going on there? If they're being combative, whether it's physically or verbally, again, behaviors are happening. We need to address them. If they're reacting to peers or teachers' comments, so if they're not being able to accept constructive feedback from a teacher, or if you see that they're having fights with their peers, again, all those are behaviors that we need to note. If they're not being compliant at home or at school, usually there is kind of non-compliance on both ends of the spectrum, then we need to talk about what we can do to increase that compliance, because that's a life skill, right? That's something that you want them to have when it comes to interacting with adults or superiors on the job. In college, if they go to college. So those are skills that we want to teach them at a young age. If you hear any sort of bullying, fighting, if they're breaking rules, self-interest behavior to me is a big red flag, right? If you're seeing that or hearing that happening, you really need to get in there and nip that in the bud before it gets to a bigger problem. And like it's caveated down there, addressing the function of the behavior, right? Why is the behavior occurring? Because if you don't know the why, then you can't really address the behavior itself and implement any sort of interventions to help it if you still have that question on why it's happening. So what to do? If your child is on an IEP, you can request an FBA. It is a separate document. It's a separate process. And so you can have that as a separate approach to behavior. If you don't have an IEP, you can still request an FBA. Or you can request an ETR. If you see that this behavior is occurring and it has been occurring, or you see that your child's really struggling with social emotional development, whether that's with peers, with adults, then request that evaluation team report and talk about if there's a disability that needs to be addressed with an IEP. Did I miss anything? You pulled it down.
Yep. So far, so good. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So we're going to share an example of an FBA. And when I was going through this, I kind of in my head painted a picture of a student who was struggling with behavior. And so I have a scenario in my head, and I have some examples that we're going to go through just so I can, I guess, show what an FBA should look like or could look like and what would go in these spots. Now, I know many of you may not have an FBA, maybe you have not seen an FBA before, and that's why I, again, just wanted to go through this piece by piece, because it is different than an IEP, it is different than an ETR, and so I just thought it would be important to go through all these pieces. So under the directions, if you again can draw your eyes to there, an FBA is, again, to determine the student's behavior and whether that's a manifestation of their disability, or to talk about if they need additional behavior supports on the IEP or outside of the IEP, and also to talk about placement options. So if your child is really struggling in the general education classroom, then this is a good tool then to have that conversation if they need to be pulled out a little bit more in the resource room or a small group setting to work with an enrichment specialist. So this is a really good tool to drive decisions. So the first thing you have to do is talk about the behavior of concern. And you have to be really specific in this behavior. And so typically during the FBA, the school psychologist or whoever's performing the FBA will do a lot of observations. The FBA is really heavy with observations and different times of the day, on different days, different settings. You want to really get a big picture of your child's day so you can, again, come to the antecedent and what's happening there. And so my example is a young child who is eloping from the classroom, okay? So behavior of concern is the child is eloping from the classroom once every hour, every day for the past 2 weeks, and does not return before a 30-minute period of calming down. So being really specific about what is happening, how often it's happening, the duration, how long it's taking for that child to get back to the classroom. So you really want specific data here. You can't just say a child is eloping from the classroom. That is not specific enough. That's not going to paint any sort of picture for you and for the team. So make sure that who's ever doing this FBA is doing some good observations to be able to see what's happening, how long it's happening, how often it's happening, how, the duration of the behavior. That's really important in this piece. Then next, you're looking for triggers. And that's why it's important to have observations in different times of the day and different settings around different people, so you can really dial in and see what's happening. So for my student, during the transition between reading and math, I noticed that he was having a really hard time transitioning and would want to elope from the classroom. Also going to specials when he was walking in the hallway, he wanted to elope from the line and go somewhere else. So I noticed that transitions were a big trigger for my student. Really, anytime they were going from one place to another. I also noticed that they happened more in the morning. And when I talked to the parent, they said that that child has poor sleeping habits. So the morning is not good for that child because they're still a little groggy, still a little sleepy. They're also a really picky eater. And so getting that child to eat a good breakfast in the morning impacts their behavior. So again, observations, talking to the parent, seeing what's going on in the home, talking to the teacher, all of those pieces are valuable to this FBA. So number 3, the setting where the behavior is likely to occur. For this student, it's in the general education classroom and also walking through the hallway and transitioning between classes. So it's happening throughout the day, but more so in the morning. And then number 4, how often, how long? So again, you want to see how long is the behavior occurring. And then in this case, how long is it taking that child to get back to the classroom, getting back to instruction? So I noted that it takes that child about 30 minutes to cool down with some support before they can transition back. So this is good because when we come to the BIP, they have a lot of different things you can work on, right? We want to work on preventing the elopement, but also being able to decrease the amount of time it takes that child to get back to the classroom. So number 5, the classroom teacher is really the person that this is going to be on the forefront of this behavior. And so the child's going to exhibit this behavior most often with the classroom teacher. But this child has a really good relationship with their speech and language pathologist. And so when the child is eloping from the classroom, the team calls the SLP to come and help, calm down that child and get him back to the classroom. So the behavior is least likely, or he's least likely to react negatively to the SLP. So it's good to note because you want to make sure you have that person on your team. Number 6, I've noted that the teacher does try to have a nice, calm demeanor with some reassuring language, reassuring, vocal response to that negative behavior. And they try to provide a lot of prompting for the child to stay in class and then get back to class. And then number 7, consequences. The child is missing a lot of instruction. Every time they elope from the classroom or from that special, they're missing instruction. So that's the consequence of that behavior. This child also has anxiety, and they're little, so they don't recognize it, but every time they miss instruction, they feel anxious getting back into the classroom because they've missed what's going on. And so they have an increased anxiety because of this behavior. And then he has a behavior chart and he gets a sad face when he does this behavior. So the team is keeping track of his behavior already, and they've noted that he gets a sad face when he does elope from the classroom and doesn't transition back in a timely manner. So you look at all that information and then you come down to the why. So what is the function or purpose of the behavior? What is that child trying to communicate with the behavior? This child is trying to escape the room because he doesn't want to do the requested task. He doesn't like math. He likes reading. He likes listening to books. He doesn't like math. So when it comes to transitioning to math, he doesn't want to do it. So he leaves the classroom. He doesn't like transitions. He feels, safe and comforted in his general education classroom. He doesn't like when he leaves and has to go to a special or to lunch. So that's why he, wants to leave the line and go back to the classroom. So he doesn't want to leave the class and go somewhere else. So looking at all the data I was able to collect with the FBA, that was the why behind the behavior. And then additional information, I included that the team has tried a sticker chart. They've tried a visual timer to be able to get him back to the class, less than 30 minutes. And they've given him a warning, but none of those have really been effective. And then I also noted under relevant information, he does have a diagnosis of autism and he does have an anxiety disorder. So again, important pieces for the team to note. So the team goes through the FBA, all that data is collected and discussed, and then you sign the FBA. So really it's, one page, but of course, if you're typing, it's going to be longer. But a lot of time goes into this FBA. And so if you request an FBA, just know that it's not going to happen overnight. I would say minimally 2 weeks, probably, for the school psychologist or whoever's on that team to be able to collect all that information, to do those observations, to talk to the parents, maybe collect some rating scales, or maybe even talk to an outside provider. So I would say 2 weeks minimum, probably more 2 to 4 weeks that you're looking at having this completed. So I just want to open up to questions. I went through that quickly. Are there any questions over the FBA itself?
Doesn't look like it.
Okay.
Let me go back to the slideshow here.
All right, if not, then I'll just jump back into the VIP.
All right. You want me to open up the document?
Yes, please.
All right.
And I will say, I wouldn't say there's a good or a bad FBA, but the best ones have the most data, right? The best ones have a lot of people on the team who are collecting that information and sharing that information with the team. A bad FBA would be one person doing 2 observations and trying to figure out what the function of the behavior is and not really knowing. So that would be a poor FBA. Okay, so after you do the FBA, then you talk about the behavior intervention plan. Sometimes teams do them back to back. A lot of times they don't. They want to, give you the information on the FBA, have you digest it, and then come back on a different day and do the VIP. but whatever the team decides, I'm comfortable with. Okay, so sources of information, of course, it's going to be that whatever was in the FBA, medical reports, observations, teacher reports, parent input. So all that information would be used for the BIP. The strength-based profile, you want to be able to identify your child's strengths. And so this child, I noted, has a strong family support. They have a strong bond with the SLP. They love trains. They love watching train videos. And so again, that's a good reinforcer. So trying to think about reinforcers. They have one friend they're really, really close with and who serves as a really good peer model. And so that's what I've noted in my strengths-based profile. Now the FBA summary statement, that's going to come straight again from the FBA. And so that was really, let's see, number 8, really the why of the function. That really is kind of what you put on here. Why is that child behaving in the manner they're behaving in? So we can make sure that we can drive the behavior plan addressing the why. And so down under the strategies and outcome worksheet, that's really where you're going to help dial into what can be done to help this child. So you talk about the setting event strategy. So what are we going to do in this setting? So I had noted that we're going to have a classroom aid assist during transitions. So we are going to have an additional adult be in the classroom that is going to be with that child during transitions to really help prompt them to stay in the classroom, to have extra eyes on them if they start to go towards the door to elope. When they're walking in the hallway in that line, having an adult stand beside them to help reassure them, give them praise when they're standing in the line and doing what they're supposed to be doing. So that's what we're going to help with the setting event strategies, have that additional adult in place.
Danielle, we do have one question too.
Okay.
The question is, can a school decline to perform an FBA when they know of behaviors interfering with education and participating in therapies required by the IEP? I'm not sure about that last part, but first of all, can they decline it when they know of behaviors interfering with education?
I mean, I would say probably just like they can deny an ETR if they don't suspect a disability. I would assume, I haven't seen it honestly, I would assume they can probably write a prior written notice saying they don't suspect the child has a behavior that's impeding their learning and probably can get by with not doing an FBA. Again, I haven't seen that. Whenever I've been in a situation that I'm requesting an FBA, we've gotten an FBA. As a school psychologist, whenever I had a request, I would do one. So I haven't been in that situation, but I would say, and Mark, you can disagree with me, but I would say a school probably could do a prior written notice and say they're not going to do one because they don't suspect that behavior is impeding learning. Mm-hmm. But I would say if you have good documentation, whether that's notes home from the teacher, or again, if they're getting disciplined, if you're seeing, their grades are dropping because of behavior, those are all good pieces of evidence to give to the team to really prove the point that you need an FBA.
Well, absolutely. If they're being disciplined, I think you have a really good case to have the FBA done, and it's going to be required if they, are proposing that the student be removed for more than 10 days, or if there's a pattern of behavior. So, yeah, it can be, I guess, declined, but you also have your appeal rights, and right to file a complaint if it is, and again, especially if it's, leading to the child being removed from the school environment. All right, thank you.
So the antecedent strategies for this child, we're going to make sure we always use that visual timer for transitions. So we're going to let that student know 15 minutes ahead of time. And we're going to have a visual timer on his desk so he knows. Now, some students, I know this causes more anxiety. So if that were the case for your child, maybe a visual timer is not a good tool to use. But this child we've seen in the past, he's good with a visual timer. So the aide is going to put the visual timer up there. That way he knows when transition time is happening. And then we're also going to use it if he does happen to elope. We're going to use that visual timer to decrease the amount of time it takes him to get back to the classroom. And then again, we're going to have the aide beside him when those transitions occur. So for the behavior teaching strategies, the aide is also going to use a social story to encourage pro-social behavior and to reduce the anxiety. So she's going to have a nice, simple social story that she's going to read to the student, just reassuring him that it's okay to transition to one place to another. His music teacher is looking forward to seeing him. And so, that's a nice, safe environment for him to go to. And we're also talking about, the behavior teaching strategies. What's happening in math? what can we do to help him be more successful in math or feel more comfortable in math? And maybe it's that aide sitting with him to assist him when he needs support. Maybe that is decreasing the amount of work he has to do for math, since math seems to be a trigger for him. And we're also going to coach the aide on using a nice, calm, reassuring voice, because that's always for anybody, right? When you're talking to a child who is a little bit elevated, having that nice, calm, reassuring voice, being at their level, making good eye contact, those are all behavior strategies that will help that child feel more at ease when it comes to that transition. And then we're going to have a sticker chart that uses train stickers because he loves trains. So we're going to have a sticker chart instead of a smiley face, sad face or chart, because that wasn't really effective. And when he got sad faces, it just really decreased the behavior we were trying to work toward. So now we're going to do stickers, and he gets to put the stickers on the sticker chart. And he's not, there's no consequences for not having stickers. So we're, taking away that aspect of the behavior chart, but he gets really excited when he gets the train sticker and puts it on his chart. We also give him a high five because he loves high fives and he loves that positive reinforcement and that praise. So those are the those are the strategies and interventions that we're going to implement for him. So again, reduce the elopement and to reduce the amount of time he's out of the classroom. And so if you want to scroll down, thank you. A little bit more.
Keep going.
All right. Yeah, you're good right there. All right, so now we're going to develop an action plan. And so kind of like an IEP, you can have separate goals. And so for this child, because we were trying to reduce the amount of time he leaves the classroom, right, the elopement, and we also want to decrease the time he's out of the classroom, those could be two separate goals. But I will say we're using very similar strategies, a similar personnel to really target both behaviors. So I would be comfortable including both of these on one goal sheet, but you can have separate goal sheets for different behaviors if that's more applicable to the behavior you're working on or behaviors you're working on. So again, the interventions, the staff is going to use a social story and positive encouragement to reduce the anxiety during transitions, and will provide praise when successful. The aide and the classroom teacher are going to be really the two people who are implementing this. But the school psychologist is going to assist the aide in producing the social story and just sort of giving them a little bit of training. Not that the school psychologist is an ABA or a BCBA, but school psychs are really good about understanding behavior and knowing how to address the behavior. So that school psych is going to be a part of the team, not on a daily basis, but being able to coach the team and then follow up with the team later. And we're going to do this plan during every transition that the child's struggling with every day for 2 weeks. And so I chose 2 weeks because there's a lot of transitions during the day. And so if you look at how many times that's occurring during the school day every day, I feel like 2 weeks would be a good point to come back to the table and talk about what's working, what's not, where are we at. And so we're going to use the sticker chart to monitor the behavior. So that's how we're going to measure the progress. So the sticker chart is really two different, it's one tool for two different purposes. Not only does the child like putting stickers on the sticker chart, so it's positive reinforcement for good behavior, but we're also going to use that to look at his daily stickers. So how many times is he getting those stickers? And that's a really easy way for us. If you wanted to graph, you certainly could, but an easy visual for us to see how he's progressing. And the aide and the teacher are going to be really in charge of, helping to encourage him to put the stickers on, making sure the stickers are going on the chart, and then maybe again graphing that if that's something that the team would like to see. And so those are going to be the people who are implementing it and monitoring it. And then we're going to review the schedule at the end of every day. So the classroom teacher and the aide are going to sit down at the end of every day and talk about how the day went. And so I think it's really important. I don't want to say hold their feet to the fire per se. I think it's really important that you have these on this piece of paper so everyone knows what their job is, what their roles are, how often it's happening. Otherwise, people just get, they get caught up in the day. One teacher might have 20 some odd students. And so I think it's just important to have it down on the piece of paper that every day we're going to meet, right? And it's, 5-10 minutes of their time, but having it on there that's what's going to occur. Because in 2 weeks when you re-meet, you want to be able to have that conversation about what's been occurring and how the student is doing. So on the next page, if you want to scroll down, Mark, is the crisis intervention plan. Now, this is really only utilized for a student who is producing harm to themselves or others. So not every child is going to have a crisis intervention plan. It may not be appropriate. For my child, I thought about this, and if a child is eloping and they're getting close to an exit, that could be considered harmful. Where I used to work, for instance, we were right on a very busy, it wasn't a highway, but it was pretty much a highway. And so that for us was always a risk. If we had a child that was going towards the outside doors, running towards the road, that was a risk. And so I had noted on here that the staff will cover the exits if the student is not in a safe place once they elope. So you want to identify a safe place for the student to go. I made the poor mistake of having a student go into the teacher's lounge, the big paper cutters, not a safe place. So make sure you identify a safe place for that student to go and make sure you cover the exit so they're not eloping outside where they shouldn't be. Don't allow them to go on the playground because getting them to come back in is not going to happen. And so measuring the progress, how is the plan going to be measured? Who is responsible for measuring it? What are you hoping? What's the outcome that you're looking for? What's that desired performance level that you want to either increase the behavior or decrease the behavior? So that's all important information to put on here. And then when are you guys going to meet again? And I would advise you to put that on the calendar so it doesn't get forgotten, it doesn't get missed. So make sure that follow-up meeting date, you put a date on there and you put it on your calendar so everybody knows, here's when we're coming back together to talk about this behavior plan. And then if you need to update the IEP, maybe you're adding a goal, or for this kiddo, right, we're adding an aid. And it may not be a one-on-one, so to speak. It may be an additional classroom aid, which would go under support for school personnel, because they're helping the school personnel. So if you need to make any sort of amendments or adjustments to the IEP, you can certainly put that here and then amend the IEP as a separate document. And then communicating the behavior plan, who's communicating? So I had put that the school psychologist is going to be responsible for communicating this plan to the specials teachers. So that school psych is going to email the plan to the specials teachers right when we have the meeting, and then in 2 weeks, the school psych is going to follow up to ask how the student is doing. So the specials teachers may not be responsible for really putting the stickers on the sticker chart. Maybe when that child leaves specials, they'll say, hey, he earned a sticker today, make sure he gets it on this chart. But it's important, again, to include all those people. I feel like the specials teachers get a little hurt when they're missed and left out of these meetings because they have that child too, and they want to see that child be successful. So making sure that those people are included in this plan. Okay, any questions over the BIP?
There is one here in the chat box.
Perfect.
It says, I'm sorry I had to step away for a minute. Is an FBA required for a crisis intervention plan? Can you please provide examples of self-harm that would necessitate a crisis intervention plan?
Yeah, I mean, if a child is banging their head on the floor, the wall, if they are hitting themselves, if they are using other objects to harm themselves, if you have a child who maybe is a little bit older and is cutting themselves, that would all be self-harm. Anytime they're doing something to themselves to harm themselves. And usually that is, it could be sensory, it could be a sensory processing component of their disability, but it also could be maybe they're nonverbal and they can't communicate that they are feeling a certain way or having pain or whatever it may be, so they self-harm. So the question, do you need an FBA for a crisis intervention plan? I would always advise to have one. I don't know if it's necessary, so to speak, but I would always advise you to have one because, again, you want to know what the function of the behavior is so you can address the behavior. Because the crisis intervention plan is, in my opinion, kind of a Band-Aid. What are we going to do when a crisis happens? But you're not addressing the behavior. So how are you really reducing the behavior? You're really just saying when a crisis happens, who's on the team? What's the team going to do? But no one's working to reduce that behavior. So yes, I would always advise you to have an FBA and a BIP as a part of the crisis plan.
Yeah, Danielle, one example that I've come across in the past is that we had a child who eloped, not very often, but it was dangerous if he did. So the crisis intervention immediately, we put into effect was they actually closed a kind of a opening in the gate that they didn't have the fence that it was mostly around the back of the school, but not all the way. So they actually put in a temporary fence and then ultimately put in a permanent fence. But the crisis intervention was to, cover the exits, have a dedicated person, and close the gate, finish the fence. And then after that, when they were able to do the FBA and BIP, they did that too.
Was that student on an IEP already?
I'm sorry?
Was that student on an IEP already?
Yes. Yeah. The
That's why.
Yeah, elopement wasn't an issue previously, so it kind of.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because I will say, from every crisis intervention plan I've had, that student has already been on an IEP, and we already have had a behavior goal. In my experience, and then the behavior is just escalating to a point that we have to have that crisis intervention plan. I would say if your child's not on an IEP, you need a crisis intervention plan, then you need that ETR. So yeah, talking about why you need the crisis intervention plan, what's happening. So whether it's an ETR and FBA, you still need, I think, that investigative piece to the puzzle.
Got it. Let's take a quick break. Someone said the internet was disconnected. Let's see, I don't know, other than if someone would just type in the question and answer whether or not they can hear us, that would be helpful. Okay. All right, so I think we're good to go. Go ahead, Danielle.
Okay, so we can go back to the PowerPoint. So that was my FBA and BIP example.
Okay. Okay, I think we've covered almost everything there. You tell me.
So yeah, I talked about how you want to include your related service providers, like your guidance counselor, mental health specialists, intervention specialist behavior. I mean, some districts are getting behavior specialists, which I find fabulous. I get so excited when I hear a district has one, because I think even if it's a small behavior, it can turn into a big behavior if it's not addressed. So I love that districts are now really including the behavior specialists or hiring behavior specialists of their own. So that's awesome. Yeah, goals in the IEP, you might have a social emotional goal, you might have a behavior goal. If your child has an ETR, they've had one and they have an IEP, go back to the ETR. If you find that there were social emotional needs noted in that ETR, they need to have that addressed in the IEP. They need to have either a goal, an accommodation, or it's in the profile saying, we understand this child has an identified need in this area, but this time we don't find it necessary to have a goal. It needs to be in there somewhere. I have a problem when I see in the ETR and it's nowhere noted in the IEP. That's a problem. So make sure it's addressed or talked about somewhere in the IEP. Cognitive behavior therapy, that's really an outside provider. You're not going to have anyone in school doing cognitive behavior therapy. So if your child has an outside counselor, psychologist they're working on, they may be doing CBT, and that's really just being able to change your thought process, therefore changing your behavior. That's what that means. And then the positive behavior interventions and supports, making sure that that is always in the back of your mind when you're going through the IEP, when you're going through the FBA and BIP, making sure that you're always trying to focus on the positive behavior approaches. And I think that we've done really good, at least in the school setting, of changing our mindset instead of talking about discipline and what we're taking away from a student, right? I think we're really shifting our mindset and increasing the idea of what we can do in a positive way to increase or decrease behaviors.
Yeah, and it's probably important to point out too that PBIS applies to all students, so schools should be taking that approach regardless. Yes,
absolutely. All right, so social emotional learning. So that is where, children and adults, where they can acquire and effectively apply their skills and knowledge to understand and manage their emotions, to be able to have positive goals, achieve those goals, show empathy and feel empathy for others, and establish and maintain those positive relationships with adults and peers. And so you especially see little ones who they really struggle with this because developmentally they're not able to really manage this. And that's okay, to be able to address behavior in a way that maybe is not on an IEP when they're little. Preschoolers, kindergarten students, I think teachers are just in tune to this and being able to develop these skills. But I think the difficulty lies when they're getting older and they're not, developing these skills, or when they're younger and you see these skills are really diminished, or we're really not seeing growth in these skills. That's really, I think, where the concern lies and where we need some supports for those students. And again, I've seen schools really, focus on this piece more so than I have had 5 years ago, where they're having mental health therapists in the school setting to work with all kids, not just kids who receive special ed supports, but all kids have access to that mental health therapist or counselor. Again, hiring behavior specialists who are really helping to address behavior in the school setting. So I think schools are recognizing the importance of social emotional well-being. It's like that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Your child is not going to learn. They're not going to be successful with reading and math if the social emotional needs of your child are not addressed. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind, that the learning happens in school, it happens at home. But if they're not showing growth, or we're seeing some sort of behavior aspect that's tied to a deficit in social emotional learning, we need to talk about what we can do to help them. So here are some interventions that you can do, or you can talk to the team about including in that IEP or behavior plan. So talking about self-awareness. So how are they in a group of students? I see some kids who are gifted or on the spectrum that can talk to people and not actually understand that people don't want to hear what they're saying anymore. So being able to be self-aware of how they are around other people and how they're approaching other people. That's social skills, right? Social skills are so important. And a lot of kids just get social skills just, by being around other people. They just pick it up. Some kids don't pick that up, and they need some direct instruction on those social skills. So that's really, really an important piece, I think, to a lot of kids when they're not having success with peers and adults. Being able to manage themselves, whether that's managing their emotions, not escalating when it's not necessary, being able to, manage their energy. Some kids have that motor that's running, and don't know what they can do to slow themselves down. Again, being aware when you're in a whole group setting. So not yelling out, shouting out, being able to raise your hand and wait your turn. When it comes to, again, like on the playground, for instance, being aware of how you interact with other kids. Great skills that we need to teach our kids. Relationship skills. I was thinking about the maintenance of relationships. A lot of kids don't have that skill. They can talk to other kids all day long, but then you ask them, how many friends do you have? Are you friends with so-and-so? No, because they have a hard time maintaining that relationship. So those are skills that need to be taught for a lot of kids. Being able to make good decisions, not poor decisions, but good decisions. So having that direct instruction and being able to model that decision making with your children. When your child encounters a situation where you have that like fork in the road, right? How do you make a good decision? What kind of mental processes take place during that time? If you need a safety plan, kind of like the crisis intervention plan, or in a part of that BIP, talk about how we can keep our kids safe and what we can do if the behavior is really becoming unsafe. And we've already talked about the PBIS being whole school. Again, a lot of schools are doing that when it comes to just building character, being able to teach all these interventions I just talked about, being able to teach them on a big scale to all kids.
And that leaves us a couple minutes, Danielle. We did have one question that I answered, through the text in the box, but I thought it was a good one, so I'll bring it up. We touched on manifestation, determination, review, which is a meeting to determine whether or not a behavior is a manifestation of a disability. And a lot of times that may be the kind of catalyst to an FBA or a BIP. But what happens in that process, or how it happens, is that if a student is disciplined in some way, so suspended or expelled, and that removal from the school environment is for more than 10 days, or if it's a pattern of behavior, so let's say they've been suspended for 5 individual days, so it's not a cumulative of 10, but it is a pattern of behavior. So they constantly, are hitting you know, a classmate, you know, assaulting a classmate, or they're constantly running out of the classroom, or they're constantly interrupting the instruction. So if it's a pattern of behavior, then you can request that instead of the student, you know, being removed from the school environment or serving the sanction that a typical student would serve, that they do in a manifestation determination review. So you're determining whether or not the behavior is a manifestation of the disability, and you're also determining whether or not the behavior is a result of the district's failure to implement an IEP. If the answer to either one of those is yes, then if there is a behavior intervention plan, it has to be updated, and the student can't be sanctioned or removed from the class environment. If the answer is no, the student can be disciplined like their non-disabled peers, and may be removed, with the caveat that a student on an IEP, if they're removed for any reason, even if it is not a manifestation of the disability, is required to still receive special education and related services. So, you know, a lot of times you figure out how to do that either at school or at home. Important that's how that comes up. That is a meeting. The manifestation determination review meeting is with the entire IEP team and any invitees, you know, from the parents, maybe an outside psychologist, for instance, or professional that can provide some insight on the behavior. And then if the answer is no, it's not a manifestation of the disability and the school has implemented the IEP correctly, then you might go right on to the next meeting, which would be maybe a suspension or expulsion hearing. So if the answer is yes, then you wouldn't go on to the suspension expulsion hearing, and you'd figure out how to address the behavior in a better way. So.
And I would, as a parent, request that the school psychologist is attending those meetings. I don't think many do attend those meetings because they're not usually invited. But that school psychologist is going to understand your child's disability probably better than anybody else in that room, aside from you as a parent. So I would always just throw that out there to parents. Try to include the school psychologist in your district, because again, that person is going to be a good spokesperson for your child and what that disability looks like.
Yeah, another good question. What if the diagnosis is given after the meeting to determine a manifestation? Well, it is a little bit too late there. The student, because if the student hasn't been evaluated or identified as a child with a disability, or the diagnosis hasn't been made, then you're likely not going to find that it's a manifestation of the disability. So the child can be sanctioned in the same way as other students. And there may be a basis if the child is subsequently diagnosed that you have that suspension or expulsion removed. And if the school is open to that, it's not easy, but it's sometimes possible to have prior sanctions removed with more information. But for the most part, you know, you're not going to have that information during the MDR hearing, so you're not going to be able to determine that it was a manifestation. Good question, though.
And Mark, I got a question. So I think you had said that when they're suspended, they receive services, correct?
Correct.
Now, if they have like one day of in-school suspension, it's my understanding that they're still supposed to receive that time on their IEP. Is that correct?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the services shouldn't go away. And sometimes they're placed into an interim alternative educational setting. So like in-school suspension, but the services still have to be delivered.
That's what I thought. I haven't dealt with that in a couple of years. That's what I thought. Thank you.
Another question. Should the parent invite the school psych? Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe you answered that.
I did. Yeah. I like that somebody was thinking on my wavelength though. Yes, always invite the school psych.
The other question is, or are BCBAs who've never seen a child acceptable to give their input? It's going to be tough if the BCBA hasn't worked with the child. It's just going to be, I suppose they can be invited for what it's worth. But you know, and those invitees to those meetings, you know, the school has to weigh what they say and, you know, give it some weight in terms of its credibility. So you just lose a little bit, you know, of the credibility if the BCBA hasn't worked with the child or, you know, has any specific information about the
Well,
child.
and I will say too, a BCBA is trained in behavior. I don't know if they're necessarily trained in understanding disabilities and what the disability looks like in the school setting. I could be wrong on that, but so they would be able to speak to your child's behavior and maybe what could be done if an FBA is, agreed upon. But I don't know if they would be a good spokesperson to talk about your child's disability and how that's impacting their education.
Yeah, I think the school psych is an absolute, just because there's a lot of good information on the evaluation that you want to look at in the MDR hearing. But, yeah, I guess it's case by case basis with the BCBA. Good question. Let me make sure there, one in the chat. Oh, that was in the chat box. Okay. That pretty much wraps it up. This was the third in the series. So next month, and that'll be September 11th, we'll have negotiation tips and IEP team building. And that will be with me and Danielle as well. And make sure if you haven't signed up for the next workshop and you want to do that, I'm going to drop the link in the chat box. Let me make sure I do that. You can click on that link and then sign up for the next workshop if you haven't done that already. And the other thing is, if anyone on has signed up for an individual guidance session, those are all virtual this month. But you should have received a separate link for that. And so that'll be separate from this link for the webinar. And that will be obviously a private session with an individual attorney to assess your situation. Those are available every month, and they follow this workshop. We do those on the half hour, so 10, 10:30, 11, and 11:30. There are typically available sessions. So if you have a scenario that you want to run by an attorney, you can do that. You can sign up for that with the same link that I just put in the chat box. So thank you very much, Danielle. Great presentation. And thank you everyone for attending.
I will see everyone next month.